All right, we are live. Thank you for joining us today and a happy new year. What better way to start a new year than looking at how Islam is false, dismantling the most obvious false prophet in history. Today, we're going to be looking at the Gnostic origins of Islam. Islam has multiple influences. We've done a series looking at pagan influences of Islam. Uh, I'll put a link to that later on. I forgot to do that beforehand, but I'll put a link to that. Also, check out Lloyd's channel, where he has done even more on the pagan origins, or as he calls it, Islamic monotheism. Welcome, Lloyd. What is your goal for the new year?
um, to destroy Islam, to see its apologists driven before me, to annoy them, frustrate them, and to I don't know what else did Conan want? To hear the lamentation of their women. uh, yeah, just to I have so much that I need to get back to. I need to finish my Sharia series. I need to do. Thank you in every turn as a horse. Yeah, I need to finish my monotheism series on my own channel, and there's so many other series that things I need to do, like the sources of Islam and the sources of the Quran. I have a lot of material already researched, written, which I need to get out. I've got probably like 200 slides on that, which I need to get out. Which I've got about 140, 160 done already.
Yeah,
And
you've
yourself?
been very busy for sure. Someone hears you have 140, 160 slides. They're like, what do you mean? Like 10 slides is a good presentation.
There's just so much. I mean, it's hard to. There's just so much to information out there now.
Absolutely. So
And
before
yourself?
we, so as I said, today we're going to be looking at the Gnostic origins. People may have heard about, say, the Gnostic pseudo gospels that the Quran borrows from, but it actually goes much deeper than that. We're going to go back to the start of Gnostic thought, and we're going to see over time how this is all connected into Islam. But before we dive into that, let me open us with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for the technology that allows us to connect with people all around the world, whether they are Christians, Muslims, or have some other sort of belief or lack any belief whatsoever. We ask that you be with us today, that you guide our discussion and you prevent us from error. We ask that anything that we say that is useful is applied to people's lives, and anything that we say that is false or not useful is simply forgotten. We ask that you be with the audience and that you help people to approach the material with an open mind, that they not simply dismiss this material because it doesn't match up with what they've heard before or what they want to believe, but rather they take it, they evaluate it, they investigate it for themselves, and if it's true, they adjust their thinking accordingly. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So I've given my introduction to the subject. What would you say about this subject of Gnosticism and Islam?
Islam claims within Islamic law, at the level of the highest scholars of Islam, to be a Gnostic religion, and the top scholars claim to be Gnostics. They claim to be the original correct Gnostics, that all those Gnostics before them were false Gnostics, but they have the true secrets.
Excellent. So did you want to share your presentation?
Yeah, let me start. Let me just share my screen. Okay, screen 2. I'll just share my full screen. Here we go. Okay, so my presentation is called. Okay, I don't see my screen, but that's fine. I don't see the sharing yet. Okay, so
Yeah,
it's
for
called.
some reason I hit add it to the scene. For some reason it didn't. So let me refresh here. See if I can get it to show up because it's not showing up right now. There we go. Sometimes it just doesn't work, who knows? And then you refresh it and it works.
Okay, great stuff. Okay, so this is called Gnostic Gospels Plagiarism in the Copy Paste Quran. So yeah, now understand I've got the Talmud up here as well, which is one of the sources. Now I'm going to try and get through 33 slides today, which is a lot. So I have to go really fast. So Thaddeus, I've got 120 at the moment, but I don't think it's a good idea to do that.
Yeah,
So or
I
more.
don't think we want to do 120 today.
So first of all, as you know, what I typically do is I try to provide at the beginning just the basic idea of the narrative, and then I try to tie a lot of threads. I put a lot of pieces on the board or threads, and then hopefully I tie those threads together towards the end, right? So what we have here is we have well, let me continue. Okay, so there's a lot of secrets. Where does Islam come from? What are the sources of the Quran? We know that the sources of all the stories in the Quran can be traced to other cultures, other geographies, other times. Now, there are some real secrets in the world, but we are unraveling the secrets of where Islam came from. Like one genuine mystery is the origin of the word mankind. We know, for instance, it's made up of two words, mank and eind, and nobody knows the meaning of those two words. So this is a mystery, and so is mankind. But we are now going to unravel the mystery of Islam. Any comment that is before I continue?
No, no, just chuckling at your introduction there.
Okay, so I just need to get something open. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to introduce briefly. This is something on Gnosticism. This is a Gnostic author. He writes books. He gives talks. It's called Mo Bedard. This is the Order of the Gnostics: Ancient Teachings for the Modern Gnostic by Mo Bedard. And I want to show you the relationship here between Gnosticism and what we would term Satanism. Okay. Now, yeah, well, we'll do this as we go. Let's continue here. He says here to us, not the Gnostic warrior tells us, and notice here the human without flesh, with this tree made of veins, and then of course the snake. Interesting symbolism. A Gnostic is a master at deconstructing the words that make up the very fabrication, invention, concoction, falsification, lie, untruth, fairy, story tale, cock and bull story, white lie, half truth, exaggeration of the matrix, the womb of the great mother, the darkness in which we live. See, they deconstruct. Now, this is, of course, we know that deconstruction is associated with cultural Marxism, with the socialists in their efforts to deconstruct Western society. And of course, Marxism has an element of Gnosticism in it. Socialism is Gnostic. To truly see the light of the truth of the world, we must realize, use our real eyes, that our inner Lucifer, the fire, the phosphorus, the spirit, must rise like the serpent, right? The Kundalini, the central nervous system, on the tree of life, our DNA, using the Logos, reason, to reach Golgotha, the place of the skull, in order to become illuminated saviors, messiahs, Christs of ourselves. Fascinating, isn't that, Thaddeus? This is similar to what
Yeah.
atheists say, but your thoughts?
Well, when you have to redefine every other term or explain every other term to your audience, that might be a slight clue that you're using bizarro language that no one can understand, which actually ties right into the original Gnostics, that it was all about the secret knowledge and only the elites, the insiders, they that truly understood. And the way to salvation in Gnostic thought, it wasn't putting your trust in Jesus or doing good deeds or anything along those lines. It was based on your knowledge. Whoever had the best knowledge, they had the most access to salvation, but they had to keep that a secret because the masses were not ready for that information, so to speak. And here we have this modern Gnostic author kind of exhibiting the same characteristics. Even ignoring the very interesting choice of words and symbolism that he uses, he's revealing what it's about. It's about secretness, and this is what we see in Islam. We see that everything has to remain a secret, and not just a secret from the outside world, but a secret from the common Muslim as well. Only the
Mhm.
elite are allowed to have the true knowledge of Islam.
Correct. Gnosticism is an elite religion. But notice everything is reinterpreted. And of course, we know that we always hear about Quranic reinterpretation. Everything is reinterpreted here. Nothing is what it is. Nothing is what it says. And of course, from a biblical point of view, we were told, Jesus says, let your yes be yes, let your no be no. But here, everything is reinterpreted through a Gnostic lens, through the Gnostic narrative. And this is standard practice for Gnosticism, to reinterpret everything. Of course, your inner Lucifer, right? Your inner Lucifer, you must let go your inner Lucifer. This is evil doctrine, correct? Now, one of the major sources, Islamic and Talmudic jurisprudence, the four roots of Islamic law and their Talmudic counterparts. Islamic law is definitely derived from the Talmud. This is not to say it's copy-paste from the Talmud. It borrows the structure, the ideas. It also borrows certain terms, but it twists those terms, it alters, it changes them. So understand, don't tell me that, leave your conspiracy theories about the Talmud at home. I'm pretty sure I know it better than you do. Now, they mention here, the influence of midrashic and biblical sources have been traced in hundreds of Quranic passages, although discrepancies show that the Prophet had no first-hand knowledge of these texts. So plagiarism, now this is just one scholar, there's many, many scholars that tell us this. Since the 8th century, scholars have been saying that this is all copy-paste from other traditions. In particular, the fundamentals of Islamic faith and rite have been traced by several scholars to Jewish, biblical, and Talmudic sources. The very name Islam, meaning wholehearted submission to God, derives ultimately from a related Hebrew word, called meaning wholeheartedly. The 5 pillars, though these are central themes of Jewish sacred days of judgment and atonement. Moreover, the Arabic terms for prayer, almsgiving, fasting, and repentance are not indigenous, but are all derived from Hebrew and Aramaic terminology. We need to keep in mind Aramaic and Hebrew here as well. And so you've got all of these things are taken from the Jewish practice. Even the term pilgrimage is linguistically identical with Hebrew Hajj, the Hajj. This is just the OCR just made a mistake there. The Hajj is taken from the Hebrew Hajj, pilgrim festival, as found in the Torah. The Quranic Qalb Safm, the whole heart, is found in Surahs 2689 and 3784. And it corresponds to the biblical Labab Salem in 1 Kings 861 and in the Talmudic Modem prayer. Right? So what you've got is, and although the root Islam is native to Arabic as to Hebrew, so the root of Islam is native to Arabic and Hebrew, right? Hebrew coming long before. The noun Islam occurs in the Quran for the first time as a technical term borrowed from older religions. Remember, the oldest use of Salem is for Shalem, right? The star god. His suggestion is that it comes from a Christian Syriac Aramaic term. Notice, this is Eastern Christian, Syriac, right? For devotion to Allah may be correct, or to God, but it ignores the fact that the Syrian term stems from the Hebrew Salem, as precisely in this context, blah, blah. Okay, so we've got some background now there's a lot of Jewish plagiarism, a lot of Jewish ideas taken from here. Early impressions, let's go back about a century. Islam was born in the desert with Arab Sabaeanism for its mother and Judaism for its father. Its foster nurse was Eastern Christianity. Sir T.W. Arnold, one of the earliest researchers on Islam. Right? Islam is not an invention, but a concoction. There is nothing novel about it except the genius of Muhammad in mixing old ingredients in a new panacea for human ills and forcing it down by means of the sword. Dr. Samuel M. Zwemer. Right? So let me just change slides here and go to something else. You've all seen this before if you've watched my monotheism series. The Sabaeans, a Muslim perspective. It says here, Muslim writer Muhammad Shukri al-Alusi lived in 1802 to 1854, compared Muslim religious practices to the Sabaeans, right? These were Yemeni pagans. Their religion was worship of the moon god, which was identical to their version of the Babylonian moon god worship. So, wow, thank you very much, Gamer. Much appreciated. Yeah, all of the scholarship I've read says is exactly the same. And yeah, I need to finish my slides on those in the future. So Arabs during the pre-Islamic period used to practice things that were included in the Islamic Sharia, right? So they made major Hajj, minor Umrah pilgrimage to the Kaaba. They performed circumambulation around the Kaaba, ran 7 times between Safa and Marwa. They threw rocks and washed themselves after intercourse. They blah, 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 blah. So what we have is a ton of things here things that were done. Sorry, let me just go here. The 4 sacred months, the sacred months had been considered sacred during the pre-Islamic period, raids, taking revenge. Obviously, it says here, Islam borrowed the hallowing of these months from pre-Islamic Arabs and introduced nothing new into the world. Even Muslim scholars, will tell us the very same thing. Muslim scholars tell us that they got their practice, that Islam as a modern practice is almost identical to an ancient pagan practice by moon worshippers, by pagans. Now, the Sharia explicitly states Islam is Gnostic. If you go to the Reliance of the Traveler, right, you're going to see this is the most popular Sharia manual in the world, and you're going to see, if you search for the term GNOS in your PDF reader, you're going to find numerous references to Gnosticism in the Reliance. Now, if I go through my database and I pull up my search software, which indexes my entire database, you'll find references from the scholars to Gnosticism in Islam all over the place. So you'll discover that the Sharia of Allah explicitly says that Islam is Gnosticism. Its major scholars are Gnostics. So take the time to do that. I've done this many times on this and my own channel and others. So just look for the letters GNOS and you'll find these references. So this Gnosticism on a layer of paganism, that's Islam. Now, without going into much detail, I will do this in the future when I get around to some other research. Gnosticism really dates to about 1200 BC, but this is post Judaic period, right? And really, it's taking the mystery religion of Egypt and trying to glom it on to the Hebrew practices. And then, of course, comes the Christian era, and then Gnosticism evolves to take Christianity and try to slap that on as a camouflage over these original pagan slash Egyptian mystery religion practices. Your thoughts, Thaddeus, before I continue?
I love this picture here, all the different sauces that Muhammad or whoever founded Islam in reality mixed together to create their new religion. Now, there's a comment earlier from Sarita that hardly any genius it was required for the mixing, because the comment said that the only genius of Muhammad was mixing all these ingredients together and then forcing them down people's throats with the sword. I love that comment. I'm definitely going to have to use that
Yeah,
again because it's just a perfect description of Islam. It just takes a bunch of stuff, a bunch of heretical ideas that are incompatible with one another, mixes them together, doesn't notice the contradictions. And if you notice the contradictions, well, too bad. Muhammad has a sword that says you can't question him.
yeah, correct. So yeah, these are all the sources of Islam. That's why I put these here. These are all the sources of Islam. So you have the Apocrypha, you have Enoch, especially. You've got Enoch and so on. We'll get into all of that. You have the Talmud and the Targums. You have Manichaeism. You have Ibyanism and the Book of Al-Jasai. That is the very well. That goes to the beginning, and that I will get to. Now, old snake, new skin. So I want to show something. I'm going to bring up another reference before we get too far. I'm going to bring up. I'm going to go here. This. Yeah, so let me go 254. So I'm going to go to the top of this just to show you guys this book. This is called Creating the Quran, a historical critical study by Stephen J. Shoemaker. So he compiles a bunch of research and so on and so on, and he gives us the following information that I will show you. Okay, so for instance, there's the case of the Katisma Church. Now, the Katisma Church was a physical church located on the road to Bethlehem from Jerusalem, just outside of Bethlehem, outside of Jerusalem. The case of and it was dedicated to the Mother Mary. They did not worship the Mother Mary, but this was their, they were dedicated to the Theotokos. The case of the Katisma Church and the Quranic nativity tradition in Quran 19:22-28 leaves little questions that we must approach the Quranic text as a corpus of traditions that remained open even beyond Muhammad's lifetime. This is very new research, right? And was continuing to absorb Jewish and Christian traditions in the decades after the Muslims, who were then calling themselves the believers before they became Muslims, conquered and occupied the Near East. Now that would include Syria, Eastern Christianity. In these 7 verses, the Quran gives a compressed account of the birth of Jesus that depends on a distinctive combination of Christian nativity traditions that is uniquely found outside the Quran only in one church. So the story of Mary in the Quran is not found in Christianity except at this one church. It is found only in the liturgical practices of a particular Marian shrine just outside Jerusalem, the Katisma Church. In the vast world of late ancient Christianity, it is only at this church that we find combined the 2 early Christian traditions that appear in the Quran's account of the Nativity. Christ's birth in a remote location rather than in Bethlehem, and Mary's refreshment by miraculous palm trees and a spring. For good measure, one must add the liturgical traditions of the same shrine also explicitly name Mary as the sister of Aaron, just as in the Quran's nativity account, at last providing clear solution to this well-known puzzle of the Quran. So they obviously borrowed this from an obscure church that is no longer, it's now simply ruins. It's actually at ground level. It's ruined to ground level. And the church still exists. The site still exists. Look up Kathisma Church. You'll see pictures on Google Earth. It's two octagonal shapes on the ground. So any comment on that, Thaddeus, before I
Yeah,
continue?
this is very interesting that we see these bizarre ideas in the Quran, and it seems to think that this is what Christianity teaches. And it's kind of been an open mystery as to where Muhammad or the author of the Quran got such bizarre ideas. And this is a new work early, well, I was going to say earlier this year, but since we're technically in the new year, in 2022, this is brand new cutting edge research coming out now, finding the origins of Islam that have long been a mystery. Before you go on, L Gamer said, wow, this is so detailed. It's like a presentation from Harvard. And I'll make a slight correction there. I think it's more like Yale, because as Yas Sarkati says, when you go to Yale, they destroy the building, meaning all of the history of Islam that you've been taught, and then they leave you with rubble because none of the Islamic history is true.
Yeah.
And they don't rebuild it for you. That's what he says, and that's why he almost left Islam. You've heard him later claim that it was because of this issue of the different versions of the Quran, but actually it's because there's no historical basis for the foundation of Islam as taught by the Islamic texts.
Yeah. Yep. Correct. So moving forward, as I said, I don't want to be a whole night and I want to get through quite a lot in a short time. So now the Quranic verses mentioning Jesus' birth, certain miracles, his crucifixion, and other events bear very close resemblance to sectarian texts dating as early as the 2nd century. Now, we can trace some of these sort of influences of Christianity on the Gnostics to as early as the year 95, between the year 95 and the year 120. So looking at late 1st, early 2nd century. The Quran's narratives are not unique to the 7th century. They come from well before. They come from multiple sources across multiple regions. The model for Islam in the Quran long pre-existed in the pseudo-biblical texts and groups, many of which were extant, still existing in the 7th century. Now, of course, I'm going to show one more reference. This, for instance, is the Quran story of Solomon and Sheba from the Jewish Targum. Now, of course, Muslims want to say, no, 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 no. The Quran story is not stolen from the Targum. So Islamic Awareness obviously writes about this. The writers, okay, Saifullah and Hanan. Now, Saifullah means the sword of Allah. So try to disguise the fact that the story of the Queen of Sheba to be found in the Quran, Surah 27, 20 to 44, originates from Jewish mythology, and in all probability from an even earlier Middle Eastern legend. So now you've got this, okay? So there's a long, and this one of the authors is Reverend W. St. Clair Tistol, and we'll be talking about him. So a lot of this scholarship goes back well over a century, a couple of hundred years, where people were starting to notice that these stories pre-existed. So let me continue. This is Tistol, William Tistol, wrote some brilliant stuff. Introduction. So the prophet of plagiarism. The Quran mentions numerous biblical figures, yet many of its stories are not found in the inspired Jewish and Christian scriptures. So where do they come from? This is one of the earliest attempts to put all of this together in a single book. The original sources of the Quran by William Tistol. There are two versions of this, an earlier one, a later one. We'll cover that, okay? Now, then there's another author called Zwemer, another important figure here who also did lots of research. This dates back to about 1905, if I recall. Arabia, the cradle of Islam, studies in the geography, people, and politics of the peninsula with an account of Islam and mission work. So understand that scholars today who are doing this research are actually just kind of reinventing the wheel. There's a huge amount of research already existing, especially by British scholars, as well as by German scholars. Some of it probably not translated, so it's not available to us, not known to us. But there is a huge body of work already done that we can just tap into if we know the names of these authors. Now, Islam Okay, this is some of the contents in the book. It's an analysis of Islam as a system developed from its creed. Now, notice here, okay, you've got, so these people knew what Islam was about way back then, stuff that people discovered only now in the 21st century. Think about all of this knowledge of all the hadiths, all of this knowledge of records of what Muhammad did, records of what Muhammad commanded, records of what Muhammad allowed. Okay, the difference, the ijma, the qiyas, the shias. Okay, and it mentions here not one of these hadith writers, Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawud, An-Nisai, Ibn Majah, not one of them flourished until 3 centuries after Muhammad. So all of these hadith writers come 300 years after Muhammad. So all of this, while we think it's new knowledge, more than a century ago, Western scholars knew all of this. Right. So this is not new. So if we go back to older scholarship, you'll find incredible information. Notice Allah has 99 names. Notice Allah has 99 names. However, if we go here, Muhammad has 201 names and titles. Thaddeus, your thoughts before I continue?
Yeah, two thoughts. I'll do the names first since I was laughing at that. It seems that Muhammad's twice as important as Allah, or has twice as much attributes as Allah. Very interesting, since he's just a prophet and Allah is God. But you're absolutely dead on that. 150 years ago, there was this flourishment of scholarship digging into the origins of Islam. And then it just kind of went by the wayside.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe like 20 or 30 years ago, people started studying the origins of Islam again, and they think they're doing something brand new that's never been done before. And it's a shame that all of this great scholarship from the 1800s has been lost. Just one comment from the audience here from Linda. Lloyd is a master researcher. I think he does nothing but research every day. He is thorough and careful. He is clear and precise. He won't bring anything that he can't support with evidence. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for that, Linda.
Yeah, thank you. So, a couple of things I must mention. Muslims believe that 104 books were sent from heaven in the following order. So, these are separate books, right? To Adam were sent 10 books. So, 10 surahs of the Quran were sent to Adam. Okay. Then Seth, the prophet Seth, got 50. Enoch got 30. Abraham got 10. But these are all lost. Okay. These were all lost. Okay, and then Moses got the Torah, David got the Zabur, right, the Psalms, and Jesus got the Injil, the final book. And Muhammad received the Quran, which is eternal, complete, and miraculous. Okay, and these are highly spoken of in the Quran, the Torah, the Zabur, and the Injil, but are now in corrupted condition and have been abrogated by the final book. All of this was well known to scholars 150 years ago. Right. So I just wanted to mention that Mo has 200 names, 99 names, and the fact that Seth and Enoch, who are part of the apocryphal tradition within the Judaic scriptures, feature within Islam. So notice they've got here analysis of the borrowed elements of Islam from heathenism, that's paganism, as existing in Mecca or other parts of Arabia. Sabaeanism is the first one. So these guys knew astrological superstitions that meteorites are cast at the devil, oaths by the stars and planets, which surahs they mentioned, circumambulation of the Kaaba and the lunar calendar, Allah as the name of a supreme deity. Allah, the Allah of the Kaaba at the time that Muhammad was a boy, was called Hubal, Hubal. Hubal is, of course, Baal. Hu is a prefix meaning he who is. He who is Baal. We all know who Baal is. That's why they prefer to just call him Allah, which is a description. It's a descriptor. It's not a name, right? Hubal was the name of the Allah of the Kaaba. Who is the Allah of this Kaaba? Oh, Hubal. Well, that's why they use Allah and not Hubal. Then they've got Mecca, center of religious pilgrimage, the Black Stone, the Hanifs, the pilgrimage. Okay, so Arabian idolatry, cosmogony. You've got Zoroastrianism. Paradise is taken from Zoroastrianism. The doctrine of the jinn from Zoroastrianism. From Buddhism, they stole things. The use of the rosary, okay, ideas and doctrines. So you've got various things. You've got stories and legends. The New Testament, the Injil, respect for religious teachers. They reference priests and monks, and so on and so on and so on. They stole from Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, even Hinduism. Okay, so you'll find that even scholars knew then that a lot of stuff. Okay, the Quran could not have been composed by any except Allah. Well, they say he forged it. Answer, bring therefore a chapter like unto it. Well, because people are going to say, but dude, this is all plagiarism. Your thoughts, Thaddeus, before I continue?
Yeah, well, one quick question here from Boris. Is Allah the moon god or Baal? And I would say both. Allah is really amalgamation of all kinds of different deities. He is the joining together of a whole bunch of different stuff.
Yep.
Your thoughts, Lloyd?
It's all of the pagan gods rolled into one. So Allah was Baal. Okay, so at the time, historically speaking, this is liberally in the Islamic text. I've done it in my monotheism series. I've done it in my Sharia series. But the Allah of the Kaaba was called Hubal. Hubal was the Allah, was the god of the Kaaba, right? So Hubal, which is Baal, was, and basically there were multiple gods they worshipped, like Alat, Manat, and Al-Uzza, and others. All right, so it's various star gods and so on. So basically, according to the scholarship that again goes way back decades and decades, they rolled up all of these into one god and just called it Allah. And there you go. Allah was all of these gods rolled into one.
And if I remember correctly, this collapsing of the gods started well before the time of Muhammad, that it was down to a handful of gods by his time, and then he just continued it and rolled them all into one.
Yeah.
One other question from the audience, our Kitsune says, is the Barak from Zoroastrianism?
Um, Probably taken from the Jewish scriptures, actually. It looks like it's actually because, in fact, the idea of the Buddha occurs 200 years after Muhammad's death, and it first appears in a poem, okay, in an Arabic poem by an Arabic poet. And it's first described to Abraham because the Muslims had made the claim that they are descended from Abraham and that the sacrifice of Abraham was not to Isaac but to Ishmael. And they had to explain how Abraham made it all the way from Bethlehem or wherever he lived, from Jerusalem, let's say, and from that area, from Hebron. They had to explain how Abraham made it from Hebron to Mecca and back in a single day. And so, therefore, they invented the idea of the Burak, because the Burak transported Abraham. So, the Burak belonged to Abraham, and then it came to Muhammad. And the idea of the Burak is taken from again, as far as I can tell, Jewish scriptures. This is not to say the Zoroastrians didn't borrow something either, but it starts originally, as far as I can tell, from certain Kabbalistic discussions about the attributes of Abraham.
Excellent.
Okay, so look at Muhammad, the counterfeit Jesus. You'll see here, this is the halo around Jesus and Moses and Abraham and all of these prophets here. And then of course here's Muhammad, the Chinese Muhammad, okay? And his halo is around his entire body. See, Muhammad is holier than all of these guys. They only got halos around their heads. The flame is only around their heads. Muhammad's whole being is on fire. This is medieval Persian. This is medieval Persian art about Momo. And of course, all the prophets prayed behind Momo, including Jesus, Abraham, you name it. They all prayed behind Mo. Now, Muhammad leads Abraham, Moses, and Jesus in prayer. Muhammad's halo covers his entire body. Mo was plagiarist in chief for Islam, and the stories in the Quran are taken from earlier uninspired works. So, heretical, pseudo-biblical, and Gnostic texts were included and altered. So, Apocrypha, Midrashim, Targums, and Gnostic myths were all thrown in the mix. That Islam is a concoction is a conclusion that dates from the 8th century, from the 700s already. So this story is not new. People knew then already. And it is reaffirmed by 19th century scholarship. So it was all rediscovered and researched in the 1800s. So let's continue. Let's have a look at St. John of Damascus. This is one of the earliest critiques of Islam. So he was born in Damascus about 680. So this is perhaps the earliest critique of Islam. He says there's superstition of the Ishmaelites, which prevails and keeps people in error. Okay, it's a forerunner of the Antichrist. They are descended from Ishmael, born to Abraham of Hagar. And for this reason, they are called both Hagarines and Ishmaelites. They are also called Saracens, which is derived from the Saras Kenoi, or destitute of Sarah, because of what Hagar said to the angel: Sarah hath sent me away destitute. These used to be idolaters. They worshipped the morning star and Aphrodite. So Aphrodite was obviously the Greek goddess that they brought back from Greece, right? So this is an idea they took back. But also Aphrodite would be part of the pagan pantheon, and she was also part of the pantheon under different names in Babylon. Now notice the morning star. The morning star is obviously the star god. So there's different names for the star god here. They have multiple different names. I just want to mention that William Tyndale, right, was also called the morning star of the Reformation, which is interesting because that's a pagan title. But anywho, so um, and then so there were great idolaters down to the time of Heraclius, and Muhammad first appeared. So the man Muhammad, after having chanced upon the Old and New Testaments, and likewise it seems having conversed with an Arian monk, devised his own heresy. He then insinuated himself into the good graces of people by a show of seeming piety. He gave out that a certain book had been sent down to him from heaven by an angel. He had set down some ridiculous compositions in this book of his and gave it to them as an object of veneration. Right, and we will see that this matches exactly a first century Gnostic heresy or early second century Gnostic heresy. The same story, just regurgitated by Momo. Any comment before I go on, Thaddeus?
Yeah, just a real quick one. Muslims will often tell us that uh, if Muhammad was really just copying from the previous scriptures, people would have been saying that. And here we have John of Damascus writing before any of the Islamic texts that we have today, any of the histories, any of the Hadith collections. He's writing before any of that. And that's exactly what he's saying. He's saying that Muhammad heard about the Old and New Testaments and he tried to copy it, and he didn't do a very good job and created a brand new heresy of his own creation. Now, John of Damascus might be slightly wrong in that it being new heresy. It's actually a rebirth of an old heresy.
Right. Yeah, let's have a look at the Targums quickly. So, Targum means translation in Hebrew. Now, look, that's not to say you can't go look up other meanings of the word, and it has like 15 other meanings, but fine. For now, translation is perfectly sufficient. The Targums were Aramaic translations of the Hebrew scriptures, often a loose paraphrase with additional commentary. Now, we want to also explain why there's so much Christian, especially Eastern Aramaic Christian influences within the Islamic narrative. They often include a variety of mythical stories and legendary midrashic material mixed in with biblical stories. So the midrash is a collection of myths and stories and legends associated with the Jewish culture of the time, right? Now, let's go to the original sources of the Quran. William St. Clair Lomas Tistel, he lived from 1859 to 1928. This is his book, The Original Sources of the Quran. And this is the 1905 edition. So, yeah, he was a British Anglican priest. He was a linguist, historian, and a philologist, which means he knew historical linguistics and etymology. He served as the secretary of the Church of England Missionary Society in Isfahan, Persia. He was fluent in several Middle Eastern languages, including Persian, Gujarati, Urdu, Punjabi, and Arabic. And he says here, Muhammad adapted his pretended revelations to what he believed to be the need of the moment. Very Gnostic as well in that sense. The same thing is true with regarding blah, blah, blah. Okay, so he mentions the story of Zainab. Muhammad says, well, you know, you can marry your son's wife if you find her attractive and you want to get her naked. So now he says that this is, okay, he goes on, Muhammad's own character and disposition have left their mark upon the moral law of Islam and upon the Quran itself. This is 1911, page 279, and this is the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge, London. So even he makes note of the fact that, you know, that he pretended revelation. So this all goes way back, and he goes into a lot of detail. In this book, he goes through all of the different stories in the Quran, and he says, okay, this one comes from this place, this one comes from that legend, this one comes from that legend, this one is Zoroastrian, this one's Hebrew, this one's this one's that. He goes in detail through all of this nonsense. He says, we must not therefore forget that Muhammad was never brought into contact with pure gospel Christianity, right? It is largely to the false forms of which the faith had almost universally assumed that the rise of Islam is due, because Muhammad was exposed to major heresies, because everything that he states is basically based on either Gnostic tradition or on heretical Christian forms, right? So this is in chapter 4 of his book, The Influence of Christianity and Christian Apocryphal Books. Okay, let me continue. He says there is no satisfactory proof that an Arabic version of the New Testament existed in Muhammad's time. Now we do know that there is one Syrian, again, now this is interesting, a Syrian, okay, so now you've got Eastern Christianity again, the Syriac Aramaic influence, was apparently requested by a caliph to write the New Testament, the Gospel, in Arabic. We have no evidence that such a thing actually happened, but we know that someone was commissioned to do so. I believe this guy was John Philoponus, and he happened to be, well, heretical would be one way to put it. So his name, they called him Johannes. You'll find different names for him. But he was a tritheist. In other words, he believed that the Godhead was three separate gods, if I recall correctly. So I could be wrong on that, but yeah, I've been through that before. So now, although I must note that while there was not an Arabic gospel available at the time, there was one church that had produced such a gospel, and they were deep into the Apocrypha as well. And that's where the word the Tawhid comes into Islam. So the word Tawhid is the oneness of God, apparently the unity of God, right? The blah blah blah, the monad. But that term actually comes from Christianity, and it comes from especially from Eastern Orthodox Christianity, from the Ethiopians. It comes from the Ethiopian Tawahedo Church, which is the unity. And this is something that you should bear in mind. So they had already had a gospel, had the Bible since the 2nd century. Right? So the Ethiopians did have it. Muhammad supposedly spoke Ethiopian. His midwife was Ethiopian. The first guy who did the azan was Ethiopian. The guy who fixed the Kaaba was Ethiopian. The guy who built his first lectern was Ethiopian, and so on and so on and so on. Muhammad's nurse, sorry, was Ethiopian, and she was with him his entire life. The only person to remain with him his entire life from birth to death comes from Ethiopia, correct. And so the Ethiopians also conquered and controlled that region, so there was a full gospel in Ethiopia, from Ethiopia in that region. So, and they did not ever translate it. It was simply spoken about, so it was paraphrased. And they were big into their Apocrypha. Thaddeus, a comment before I go on?
Yeah, I got a couple comments that I need to bring up here. First, a super chat from Tim Moore. This is awesome. God bless you guys. Love learning this stuff. Thank you very much for the feedback, and thank you for the donation as well. We have over 130 people watching, which is the second most I've ever had, second only to when I had David Wood on this channel. So clearly,
Nice.
this is a topic that people are really loving. So if you find this material useful, go ahead and hit that like button. Or if you're a Muslim, pretend the K is silent and just hit the lie button. YouTube will know that you're saying it's a lie. Maximus said that the Nag Hammadi, a library, reminds me of Islamic writings. Exactly. We'll get to that later, I'm sure. And Tim also
that's
said,
the Gnostic text, yeah.
Yep. It's a Gnostic collection of texts. And Tim Moore also said that as a question, is it plausible after Nicaea the heretics were pushed eastward with their teaching, which became Islam?
Okay, yeah, that's a let's do that's a two-part question. So we need to understand that on the border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia today is a city called Najran. At that time, that was a Christian city. It was a source of pilgrimage, right? It was a place that people went to. It was a destination, rather, of pilgrimage. But because it was so far outside the Roman Empire had Christianized effectively, right? And what happens is all the heretics were pushed out. The heretics went to basically three places. They went to Haran in Turkey, on the Iraqi-Syria-Turkey border, more or less. So Haran, southern Turkey, very close to Syria, very close to Babylon, right, to Iraq. That's one place they went. Two, all the heretics, all these pagans, the Gnostics, all of these pseudo-Christian groups, some went to Alexandria. Others went to, the majority, it seems, ended up in southern Arabia, in Najran. And the problem is now that for instance, the Gospel of Matthew had been translated, and these prophets went out, these apostles, my God, went out to proselytize, spread the faith. But the problem is when the Gnostics and the heretics got hold of a copy of the original Gospels, they, of course, edited them and changed them to suit their own personal interpretations. Then you very rapidly had 5 or 6 different versions of the same story. And now there was a fight to prove the authenticity of the original and to battle it out. And this caused massive amounts of confusion. People had no idea which was authentic. This was all happening in southern Arabia. So because of this, now remember, you had Arabia Felix, happy Arabia. You had Arabia Deserta, desert Arabia, dry, arid Arabia. But people know that from the Romans. But there was a third title, Arabia Heresium Ferax. Arabia Heresium Ferax. Arabia, the bearer of heresies. This was southern Arabia, centered specifically referring to Najran, where so many heresies came from. So they were kicked out of Rome, they were kicked out of Christian Europe and shoved south and east and west, and they ended up mostly in Najran. Hopefully that answers that question. And then, of course, it's a mixture of a bunch of different things, but it's yeah. The second portion is too complex to tackle now. Thaddeus, any comment before I move on?
Uh, I brought this up specifically so that you could get that point across that Arabia was called the bearer of heresies. That this is where all the heretics went, and then Muhammad or the founders of Islam are growing up in that environment, and they think they're getting Christianity, but they're actually only getting heresies. Tisdall put that very well, that the one thing that Islam doesn't copy from is Orthodox Christianity. It copies from Jewish mysticism, it copies from paganism, it copies from Gnostic ideas, it copies from religions that were heretical Christian religions that were floating around at the time. Never copies from Orthodox Christianity, strangely enough,
Yeah.
almost like it's anti-Christ in its nature.
Yeah, there's a paper on this which is very, very interesting. You can get it on ResearchGate. Arabia Heresium Ferax. Okay, Arabia, bearer of heresies. Schismatic Christianity's potential influence on Muhammad and the Quran. This is a worthwhile paper, well worth reading. Okay, definitely well worth reading and looking into this. It's so schismatic, so very well worth reading through. Okay, so things to bear in mind. Um, I mean, all hopefully topics I will tackle and go through as we go. So, in the Orthodox Church, the gospel was neglected in favor of legends of saints, which appealed to the popular taste for the marvelous. So, sadly, the church kind of deviated and did things that were, they were appealing to the myths and legends that people that people enjoyed. They strayed away from the doctrine, from the so don't forget the Orthodox Church, like the Eastern Orthodox, like the church in Egypt, the church in Ethiopia. They were at one point, you can say, definitely heterodox. Now they've kind of joined up their doctrine to that of the Catholic Church, right? They've become Orthodox. They've aligned that, but in the past, you could say that they were heretical. Now, Arabia was a refuge for heretics of different sects expelled from the Roman Empire. It is clear that from the Quran, that many of the mythical stories in the apocryphal Gospels and heretical Gnostic works must have reached Muhammad and have been accepted by him as true. Because Muslims will lie to you and argue with you until they are blue in the face that the Islamic Quranic versions of the stories are true. Despite the fact that you've got a biblical version which is attested throughout history for 2,000 years. So, I mean, if
Indeed.
you look at the Islamic version of the story of the crucifixion and the ascension, you're going to get every scholar gives you a completely different tale, and they say we are the ones confused. Okay. Now, Tistel goes on to say in Quran 25:4, but the misbelievers say, naught is this but a lie which Muhammad has forged, and others have helped him at it. Even the Quran itself makes note again of the fact that Muhammad was constantly accused of plagiarism. Quran 25:5, and they say, tales of the ancients which he has caused to be written, and they are dictated before him morning and evening. So people are telling him these stories and he's writing them down. Notice it doesn't say that scribes are writing them down, it says Momo is writing them down, oddly. And Quran 37:36 and said, shall we forsake our gods for a mad poet? Even in the Quran, Muhammad is called a mad poet. Poets write fiction, last I checked. That is your thoughts before I continue.
Yeah, here we see even in the Quran that people were clearly accusing Muhammad of repeating well-known stories and pretending that they were revelation. So that when the Muslim says, why didn't people accuse Muhammad of this? They're just like in a total fantasy world, because they did. And the all-knowing God, Allah, says that, well, he couldn't be copying, because that guy you said he's copying from, he doesn't speak Arabic, and this is pure Arabic that's being written, as if human language can't be translated. But this is the best excuse the all-knowing God could come up with.
Yep. So to continue now, there's a version of Tisdall's book called The Sources of Islam. Okay, forgo this one. So this is his earlier book. Skip this one and go to his Sources of the Quran for better, more updated material. He admits here that he had certain gaps in his knowledge. He might have made certain errors. So skip this one. If you see the Sources of Islam, don't use it. I've seen others, researchers, use this. Don't do that. Go to Sources of the Quran, which is his updated work. Okay, so So Muhammad is all ears. So this is from the Sirah, the life of Muhammad. This is from the biography of the Gospels of Muhammad. It says here, whoever wants to see Satan, let him take a look at this guy. He was a sturdy black man with long flowing hair, inflamed eyes, and dark cheeks. He used to come and talk to the apostle and listen to him and then carry what he had said to the hypocrites. So he used to tell other people what Mo had been saying. It was he who said to Mo, Muhammad is all ears. If anyone tells him anything, he believes it. So Muhammad had a nickname, the ear. Okay, according to the Islamic sources, Muhammad's nickname was the ear because he listened and believed everything he was told and thought it was true. Among them are those who torment the Prophet and say he is an ear, and say an ear that is good for you. He has faith in Allah and trusts the faithful, and is a mercy for those of you who have faith. As for those who torment the Apostle of Allah, there's a painful punishment for them. Quran 961. An ear, say all ear in the Quran. Muhammad is all ear. The guy's all ears. He just listens and he's gullible, in other words. Gullible.
Yes,
Thaddeus, you're
but
smiling?
he's a good ear because he listens to all the good things that other people are saying and then he repeats them for Allah.
Yeah, no. No, obviously they try to paint this guy as a lunatic, as a nutcase, right? Now, okay, this is going to be very text heavy, but I need to. Unfortunately, it's hard to decide what to cut out, what to leave in. Okay, now this is from a paper, from a couple of papers, but this is Heralds of That Good Realm: Syrio, Mesopotamian Gnosis, and Jewish Traditions by John C. Reeves. Now, I've listened to hours of lectures by John Reeves, and I've read through a couple of papers now. So yeah, and this was published by Brill, 1996. It's called Nag Hammadi and Manichaean Studies. So we're going to be tying a lot of threads together. So published as Jewish Law in Manichaean Cosmogony, Studies in the Book of Giant Traditions, right? Through the careful analysis of various pseudepigraphical traditions used and transformed by the Manichaeans, Reeves shows the deep impact of Jewish literary traditions far beyond the boundaries of rabbinic Judaism and patristic Christianity. In other words, the Jewish traditions spread far beyond Judaism itself or early church fathers of Christianity. It made its way into multiple sources, even much later, 4th and 5th century ones, like the Manichaeans. He says that such an approach is not novel. In Histoire critique de Manichée et de Manichisme, blah, 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 published in 1734. So in the 1730s already, Huguenot scholar Isaac de blah, 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 the true founder of Manichaean studies, had already recognized the paramount importance of Jewish apocryphal literature in the immediate background of Manichaeism. Right, so this kind of plagiarism was already noted, and we're going to see how Manichaeism makes its way to Islam as we go. Since the discoveries of the Qumran scrolls and of the Nag Hammadi codices, much light has been shed upon the origins of various Jewish pseudepigraphical traditions. That's like the pseudepigrapha, right? That's the deuterocanonical, the not authentic texts. They're not considered authentic. They're considered legendary. So their development and fortlive and their survival among Jews, Christians, Gnostics, sectarians of various shades, Manichaeans, and Muslims. Oh my, oh my, oh my. So in 1734, it was already recognized that legendary and mythical tales had made their ways into numerous different traditions, including the Gnostics and the Muslims. Your thoughts, Thaddeus? You're smiling there.
Yeah, this is great. We get this impression that, this is a new discovery that just happened in the last 20, 30 years. But when you research it, it seems that it's actually something that people interacting with Muslims have known all along, right from the time of John of Damascus up to the present day. When Christians encountered Muslims, which they didn't always do, but when they did encounter Muslims, they instantly recognized that their so-called scriptures were borrowing from heresies.
Yep. So they mention here, of course, that Enoch plays a role here. That's definitely the book of Enoch plays a role. And they mention they reflect multiple transformations of these traditions. So these stories have changed. They've been translated, they've been transformed and absorbed according to the context of different heretical traditions, right? And it says, which know not the clear-cut boundaries drawn by rising orthodoxies in the first Christian centuries. So in Christian orthodoxy, the stories took on a fixed form. That was it. Whereas in these different in these different heresies, they took on their own forms. They all changed and altered. So you've got these various heterodoxies or radical movements seeking to retain enclave cultures, right, which survive and sometimes flourish on the margins of churches growing under broader light. And these were the best carriers of these Jewish traditions. So these false traditions survived on the fringes, and they eventually would make their way back into the mainstream here and there. But they survived. Okay, so you've got that. Now, these processes through which these traditions emerged were cherished and developed in sectarian movements within and without Judaism. So some of them were within the Judaic practice, some outside. Okay. Yet one thing is certain: these traditions reflect a strong interest in myth, not the history. They weren't interested in the factual history that was the recorded history of Christianity and Judaism. They were interested in myth. It is precisely such religious trends which are closest to mythical thought patterns and which we call generically Gnosticism, which will show the greatest interest in these traditions. Now, I can go into the reliance and I can show you that Islam is explicitly said by the major scholars of Islam to be a Gnostic religion. I don't know if that's worth doing, Thaddeus, but your thoughts on this so far? I know I'm going pretty fast
Yeah,
through all this, but
well, I think that I think the pacing's actually good. It's faster than usual, but there's so much knowledge. We don't want to make this a 10-hour stream, so I think the
yeah,
pacing is good. Um, but I wanted to bring up this comment from Too Many Marys. Duck and Adam Seeker have read the Manichaean text translated in Arabic, and much of the Quran is directly copied from these Manichaean texts. It's not just shared ideas, but shared words, even, which I find very interesting.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, it's so I'm trying to go. Yeah, I try. I'm not able to read the thing in Arabic, which is fantastic that they can. But yeah,
Yeah,
so
real quickly on that last statement there, this is a really important statement that these traditions reflect a strong interest in myth, and this is a very accurate perception and a very important one, because the Quran takes these stories, right? It takes the biblical stories, but it doesn't go with what the Bible says, generally speaking. Instead, it goes with these fantastical imaginary tales that people had made up to entertain themselves. And that's what the author of the Quran is trying to do. He's trying to entertain his audience with these fantastical tales. The problem is they have no basis in history. And in many cases, the original authors knew they were making up a fantasy tale, uh, didn't pretend it was anything other than that. And yet Muhammad couldn't tell that it was not actual history.
yeah, and remember they did say that these fringe churches, these supposedly Orthodox churches, were focusing more on myth and legend, entertaining stories than on actual proper gospel narrative. So it says here both rabbinic Judaism and patristic Christianity, that's the early church fathers, will make visible efforts to distance themselves from such mythical thought patterns. Interesting. So the Jews and the Christians are going like, hold on, hold on, hold on. We're not into this whole mythical stuff. Yes, they're there. They're part of the history of, the stories, part of the culture. But no, we don't accept that as authentic, right? So in doing so, mainstream Jews and Christians will try their best to ignore or even forget much of their apocryphal literature, which will often owe its survival to underground channels, to heresies, basically, right? So Reeves' work is a comparative analysis of various pseudepigraphic citations in the Cologne Mani Codex, that extremely important document discovered a generation ago in Egypt, which offers a Manichaean biography of the Prophet of Light. Now, Muhammad is the man of light. Muhammad is the light of Allah. Muhammad's light is the light of all the prophets, because Allah made Muhammad out of his Tawhid. Muhammad was made from the essence of Allah. Muhammad was with Allah before the earth was created. Muhammad was there for the creation of the earth. The earth was made for Muhammad. Muhammad's light is the sun. Muhammad's light lights up the heavens. Muhammad's light lights up paradise. Muhammad's light lights up the throne of Allah. Muhammad's light was taken, and Allah took a small piece of Muhammad and then divided it into all the prophets, into Jesus and Abraham, and blah, blah, blah. And that's why the prophets have light, and Muhammad is a man of light. And Muhammad was the light of the lamp that all the prophets worshipped, and all the souls worshipped, and all the angels of heaven worshipped before the earth was made, and blah, blah, blah. The prophet of light. So that's taken from Mani. More precisely, these citations all come from a part of the text attributed to Bereus, a Manichaean teacher of the second generation, and the heart of the work deals with quotations from previously unknown books attributed to Adam, Seth, Enosh, Shem, and Enoch. Now, I showed earlier that Islam does place some interest in these books. In fact, they were top of the list originally when I showed that little old chart from a century plus ago. They mention these first because these are important to the scholars of Islam, even though they're not known to the lay Muslims, like that idiot in the comments, Muhammad Deen Muhammad. I mean, this is this is of importance to the scholars of Islam. They reflect Dr. Reeves' vast linguistic knowledge. Okay, blah blah blah. And it says here he doesn't use the term syncretism and prefers symbiosis. So Reeves doesn't say this is a syncretism, just a sheer plagiarism. He says no, it's a symbiosis. And he borrows that from another scholar, and he says symbiosis refers to people from different religious or ethnic communities sharing much the same culture. So that would equate to what is happening in Arabia, the sharing of culture, right? So blah blah blah. See, there's no reason to believe this is what obtained in the late antique Near East, but this is the critic guy talking about this. But except of course if one deals with magic. Now that's also interesting. Magic. Thaddeus, your thoughts?
Yeah, that's definitely very interesting. Of course, Muslims will tell us that Islam is pure monotheism. It has nothing to do with these mystical, magical beliefs. And then we look at what the well-informed, highest scholars of Islam are saying, and it seems that they are interested in magic type things, like words having mystical magic
Yep.
properties. You say the right words and you get benefit and stuff like that. So very interesting that this scholar sees that connection as well.
Yeah, actually, let me just go to one thing because this might be useful to this might be useful to people just to see the connection and why it's actually of relevance. Um, I just need to look up the term akhruf. Okay, here we go. I just want to mention everyone knows the term akhruf and the kira'at. Okay, you all know the basic standard. Here's an answer. Go away. Stop researching. Don't look any deeper. Please disappear. Answer. Okay. I want you to see here harf. Plural is akhruf or huruf. Akhruf, the akhruf. A letter of the alphabet, a word, also a Quranic reading or a dialect. Now, do understand that typically within a dictionary or an encyclopedia, the very first reference is the most important one, and then they become less and less and less important as you get away from the first one. But notice, so this is not first a Quranic reading or dialect. Now, these are all true. However, notice here, ilm al-akhruf or ilm al-khuruf, onomatomancy, a magical practice based on the occult properties of the letters of the alphabet and of the divine and angelic names which they form. And this is applied to the Quran because all of the words in the Quran are either of earth, air, fire, water, and all of them are linked to magical practice. So I've covered this before in previous shows. If you go through the Encyclopedia of Islam, it explains all of this. If you read through the scholars, they'll tell you that it's all magical practice based on word magic. Because the major scholars of Islam have their own version of Kabbalah. So the Sufis are the Kabbalists of Islam. They're the highest scholars in Islam, and they are the Kabbalists. Now, to continue, okay? So the citations by Boreas bears witness to the apostolic credibility of Mani. So they want to make him a credible apostle. So Mani is the last in a series of prophets, like a certain Muhammad, okay? Since the Urgeschichte, since the time primordial, right? So since the primordial time and throughout history. So he's the last in a series of prophets from the beginning, from the time of Adam. Mani is also seen elsewhere in Manichaean traditions as offering the final and total revelation. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
So, which was previously revealed in an incomplete fashion, by the way, to mankind, to the prophets in the East and the West and in the central lands. Buddha, Jesus, and Zarathustra. Just like Muslims tell us, Muhammad's the final, the complete revelation. Okay? Mani saw himself as a true prophet, as a master of truth. Blah, blah, blah. Okay? Now, the various fragments analyzed by Reeves all deal with heavenly raptures of prophets, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I'm not going to get too far into that, but understand, Mani grew up among a group called the Alkasites or the Alchacites in a Jewish Christian Baptist sect. These were baptizers. We need to bear this in mind. These are not orthodox by any means. These are heretical through and through. We'll discuss them. This is where we're going to get to, these Alkasites or Alchacites. But understand that these Manichaeans and the founder of the Alkasites grew up for 20 years as a Manichaean before he split away to form the Altricites, and then you'll see from there you suddenly get to Islam. Okay, so money grew up amongst the Alkacites, sorry, and money grew up among the Alkacites. Sorry, the Alkacites, and then it goes to Muhammad. So now look here in the life of Muhammad, a translation of Ibn Ishaq, Sirat Rasulallah, right? From that very night, every one of them was able to speak the language of the people to whom he was sent. All right. And those whom Jesus, son of Mary, sent, both disciples and those who came after them in the land, were Peter, the disciple, and Paul with him. And Paul belonged to the followers. So now, oddly enough, this is recounting a biblical story in the Sirah, the Gospel of Muhammad. Is Hegel the same philosopher of the Hegelian dialectic? Yes, that would be Hegel. Yeah, I know, I saw that. I wasn't going to go into any of that. Yeah, the Hegelian dialectic. Yeah. So, but notice here though, it says that, okay, so Peter the disciple and Paul with him, and Paul belonged to the followers. Notice even in the Gospel of Muhammad, Paul belonged to the followers. Paul was a good apostle, right? Paul was a good servant of Allah and a good servant to Jesus. And he went to Rome. Andrew and Matthew went to the land of the cannibals. I wish they were more specific. Do you know which land that was? That is, they went to the land of the cannibals.
No, I don't, sadly.
Must have been Canada. Must have been Canada. That's all I can think of. Because I mean, we all know this. There's 3 genders in the world: men, women, and Canadians. Must be Canada. And then Thomas went to the land of Babel, which is the land of the East. That's very specific. It could be the Philippines, it could be Bali, it could be Japan, it could be Russia. How far east? I don't know, man. It could be Cincinnati if you live in the West. I don't know. The land of Babel. Philip went to Carthage, which is Africa. John to Ephesus, the city of the young men of the cave. James went to Jerusalem, which is Aelia, the city of the sanctuary. But notice Bartholomew went to Arabia, which is the land of the Hijaz. Even the Islamic scriptures acknowledge that these disciples actually went into Arabia to spread the gospel. Simon went to the land of the Berbers, and Judah, who was not one of the disciples, was put in the place of Judas. Interestingly enough, so they acknowledge that these apostles actually went to spread the gospel in Arabia. Let's have a look at the Biblical Archaeology Review. Okay, this is this fantastic resource that goes. It's archaeology. It's the best archaeology in the world. And what they do is they look for, and they include in their journal archaeology that relates to the Bible, that proves things that come from the Bible. Mel, fantastic! Wow. Dashing Rogue, Happy New Year. And Happy New Year, everyone. I hope it's been a great celebration. So now, reconstructing Paul's hidden years in the desert. So now we know that the Apostle Paul actually went, at the very least, went to Petra. At the very least, went to Petra. Because when he went back to Israel, remember the king of Petra sent assassins after him to kill him. Right. So why else would the king of Petra? Because he was proselytizing without a license. Right. Which will happen to you today in London, in Britain. I discovered a woman praying outside an abortion clinic was arrested for praying silently, just standing and praying. Okay, so I went into Arabia. Later I returned again unto Damascus. Okay, Galatians 1:17. That's Paul speaking to us. Behold, are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how do we hear each one of us in our language? Well, they are Parthians, they are Medes, they are Elamites. Parthia is Iran, right? This will be northern sort of, Iran, I believe. Residing in Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia. Okay, and this Parthians also would be, I think, linked to Syria, but Pontus, Asia, and Egypt. Okay, so Mesopotamia and Egypt. So now you're looking at these areas: Mesopotamia, Egypt, Babylon, and Egypt, and the parts of Libya towards Cyrene. And also notice both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. We hear them speaking in our own languages. So notice Arabs heard about this. People in Egypt heard about this. People in Mesopotamia, some of the places where the heresies grew. According to even the Bible, this Paul's message was heard everywhere. The gospel's message was heard everywhere. And of course, these are where the major heresies come from, and these people would have been twisting that story. Your thoughts, Thaddeus, before I go on?
Yeah, this is very interesting material. We're kind of seeing over and over again that the history supports this idea that there is a version of Christian thought in Arabia, that this is, well, first of all, that, the Muslim claim that the gospel or the book, the Torah, the gospel, the book had never come to Arabia before is false. But second, we're seeing that it's kind of a distorted version that it's lost its connections to
Yeah.
orthodoxy. I have
No.
several super chats that I want to read real quick. Dashing Rogue, Happy New Year. Mel J, Happy New Year as well. Thank you very much for those donations. And then Yeshua the King. Lloyd, I know Sharia agrees 75% of the time, but is there any particular reason you only use Hanafi and Shafi instead of all four?
Thaddeus, you'll have to answer that because you paid you the money.
Well, I mean, I think that Lloyd does look at different sources. It just happens that the most popular texts happen to be from those two schools, so that's what he usually goes to because they're the
Yeah,
most
I
popular.
can't answer. I'm just kidding, but yeah, but you're right. No, the most complete, the most detailed of the Islamic fiqh sources in English is the Hanafi Hidayah. It's over 2,650 pages. So it is very, very detailed. It is probably the most detailed text. And apparently, when you are a scholar and you study to become a mufti or whatever, you go to university for 5 or 7 years or whatever, the Hidayah is the last of the manuals that you read because it is so detailed. It is so dense. The Shafi is the guy who really developed the fiqh as we know it today. He's the guy that really sort of founded the idea of the format, the structure the fiqh took on. It existed before him, but he's the one who really tied it all together and made it what it is today. He's also the one that said that the hadiths are actually canonical. The hadiths actually are authoritative. They're sources of law. They're on the same level as the Quran, effectively. So also the Reliance of the Traveler is the most common. It's the most important in terms of use amongst the lay Muslims. It is the most common fiqh manual in the world, right? The Reliance of the Traveler, which is Hanafi. Which is Shafi. So these two are extremely popular. Also, the Hanafites are the biggest of the groups of the madhabs, right? Most Muslims are Hanafite. So it makes sense to use what is the most common and what is the most important. And these two qualify on that score. So it covers the
Excellent.
largest bulk of Muslims, and it's the most, and also the Reliance is the most detailed. It just has so much of everything. It explains everything so well. Many Islamic law manuals focus on a given area, like just marriage. So you get one that focuses just on marriage, whereas these books cover like everything. So they're useful for that. You don't have to swap between multiple books. Any further commentaries?
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to point out that we have Islamic Origins in the chat,
Oh
formerly
wow,
known as
welcome.
Sneakers Corner. He says that a live stream has evidence of St. Thomas in China that you can check out afterwards. I don't know if he means a live stream on his channel or not, but either way, check out his channel. He
Awesome.
is also looking into the historical origins of Islam, hence the name of his channel, and he does great work.
All right. Okay, so now, so brief summary of the book of Al-Chasai. It's a non-canonical book which is now lost. This was referenced by Hippolytus in his book Refutation of All Heresies, by Epiphanius in the Panarion, and also Origen, early church fathers. See Eusebius, Ecclesiastical History, who contend that it was used by the followers of Al-Chasai, a heretical group known as the Alchasites. So it was never widely authoritative in the early church period. Patristic sources identify Alchasites as one of three groups of Jews, including Ebionites and Nazarenes. Remember, Ebionism is one of the sources of Islam, and the Nazarenes, who would seem to be a sort of a fringe heretical Jewish sect, right, who combined aspects of Jewish practice with Christian beliefs. Originating at the start of the 2nd century AD, so you're talking the years 95 to about 115, 120, they appeared to practice rigid asceticism while emphasizing theosophical speculation. Sounds a tad Gnostic. The Book of Al-Chasai reportedly acknowledged a second baptism, right, which can be you can relate this to Islamic ablution, right, that affected forgiveness for adultery and healed certain diseases and wounds, such as bites from mad dogs. Very interesting that they would mention mad dogs. I need to check if Islam has mention of mad dogs. Now, the text claimed that Jesus himself reveals the text works to the prophet Al-Chasai. That's according to Seeberg. Now, there are other authors that will tell you different things. We'll cover all of that. The work shows signs of being composed in Aramaic and then translated into Greek. Now, the reason that that's important is that the book came from this area here, Parthia. That's why I mentioned this source here with St. Peter, who went to Parthia. So they learned about this and then they twisted the story and then made it their own. and then translated it into Greek, okay? And in works by the early church fathers, the Altricites, along with the Ebionites, were regarded as heretics, right? So they were regarded as heretics. These people were heretical. And these guys are important. Now notice the original meaning of the word apocryphal is not so much uncanonical, but rather the original meaning is hidden or secret knowledge. Gnosticism is all about secret or hidden knowledge, referring to the secret or esoteric character of the composition to which this term is applied. Thus, the opening lines of the Apocryphon of John state that the book contains the teachings and the sayings of the Savior, which are revealed to them as a mystery, which is hidden in silence. These full and definitive teachings of the risen Jesus are only to be passed on secretly to John's fellow believers. And at the end of the text, there's a strict prohibition of divulging this secret to the uninitiated. Now, remember, Sharia is a secret. Muslims are not allowed to speak to you about it. They are forbidden. It's treason. It is the death penalty for them to reveal the Sharia to you. Why do you think Muslims don't talk about it? Why do you think they won't speak about it publicly? In 3 years, I've invited every single Muslim commenter to say, fine, you have a big mouth. Let's do a live public discussion. We'll just read the Sharia and we can just discuss it. I've never had someone accept, right? Because they know they're not allowed to. It's a secret. It's the secret belonging to the elite scholars, the highest level of scholars only, right? And then they state here, cursed is anyone who will give it away for a present or for food or drink or clothing or any such thing. A prohibition is also found in the book of the great mysterious Logos in the Codex Brucianus, where Jesus says, these mysteries which I will reveal to you, safeguard them and do not give them away to anybody unless they are worthy of them. Do not give them away to father or mother, brother or sister, or any other relatives, not for food or drink, nor for the sake of a woman or gold or silver, or for anything at all in the world. And there are very similar prohibitions in the Sharia not to reveal the Sharia, right? In the apocryphal epistle of James, the author speaks of a secret text written in Hebrew script, in which the recipient of the letter is urged not to divulge to the masses. They are big on secrecy. So any thoughts, Thaddeus, before I continue?
Yeah, this is the heart of Gnostic thought, is that there's this secret knowledge that only those who join the group can have access to. And as a couple people pointed out in chat today, this is the way modern cults work as well. Uh, Explicitly religious cults, but also like these cults of personalities where you have to pay this guru money to get secret knowledge about how to become rich and famous, or how to have all the women you want or whatever. It's kind of the modern reinterpretation of Gnosticism are these self-help gurus.
Fair enough. Fair point. Yeah. All right. So now this is the Gnostic idea that this is the real world, and then you stick your head out, and you find eventually you connect to the real world. You see the real truth, right? Like we saw in the beginning, the opening slide that nutcase was telling us about. Right. So now let's look at Gabriel in the book of Al-Jasi. Notice Parthia is right here. This is Parthia next to the Caspian Sea. This is Persia right here. All right, this is Arabia. Sorry, my bad. And Parthia is further east. So notice that the apostles are said historically to have traveled to Parthia, and this is where the book of Al-Jasi came from. So this is about 600 BC. This is Babylon here, right? This should be Greece and Italy around here, right? And if I have that correct, do I? Can't tell. Oh, this is Crete here. Yeah. So this is a bit of a map of the time. So you've got the Median Empire, the Chaldean Empire, the Egyptian Empire here, and the Lydian Empire there. Okay. The Lydian Empire was formed by a woman called Lydia. Don't let anyone tell you differently. Now, just kidding. Okay. Now, this is the Sasanian Empire at its greatest extent, circa 620 under Chosra II. The Sasanian Empire succeeded the Parthian Empire, being the last Persian imperial dynasty before the Muslim conquest in the mid-7th century. So now you've got suddenly this mixing of this Persian with this, whatever the previous empire was, right? The Parthians and the Sasanians, because now they were conquered. So of course these things would mix. They mentioned there was this mixing earlier. I mentioned scholar says there's this mixing, right? You can call it a syncretism, or someone called it a symbiosis. But this would explain some of the fact that ideas did travel. So now let's have a look at Gabriel and the book of Al-Jasi. So what shall I read? He pressed me with it so tightly that I thought it was death, and let me go and said, read. When I said, what shall I read? And he pressed me again and blah, blah, blah. He pressed me the third time, so I thought it was death, and he said, read. And then I said, what shall I read? And then Gabriel says, read in the name of thy Lord who created man of blood coagulated. So I read it. None of God's creatures was more hateful to me than an ecstatic poet or a man possessed. Even in the Gospels of Muhammad, the Sirah, he states that nothing is more hated to them than an ecstatic poet. And in the Quran, it says, shall we listen to a mad poet? Woe is me, poet or possessed. He says, poet or possessed. Never shall Quraysh say this of me. I don't want them to say that I am possessed. Now, if I finally finish my notes on the jinn and the jinn, which comes from Persia ultimately, but the pagans of Arabia had a huge history about the jinn. And if you look at their poems, their songs, and their stories of the jinn, their myths and narratives, I need to finish that. Man, that's fascinating. You'll see why that is so important within Arab culture. Never shall the Quraysh say that I'm a mad poet or possessed. I will go to the top of the mountain and throw myself down that I may kill myself and gain rest. And there he goes to the top of the mountain, and what he sees is Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, in the form of a man with feet astride the horizon. In other words, he sees Gabriel as a massive, massive angel. And now we're going to start to see the parallels between this early heretical sect called the Altricites and the same references found within Islam, which is the only doctrine to retain this idea. Thaddeus, before I go on, anything?
The fact that Muhammad is, he has this encounter with the being in the cave, and he thinks that he's either possessed or he's a poet. That might not make a lot of sense to us, but when we understand the culture, the two are kind of closely related because good poets were thought to be inhabited by the jinn, that the
Correct.
jinn would enter
Possessed,
into,
literally possessed.
yeah,
They gave themselves over to a demon, and the better the
right.
poet, the more powerful the demon.
Right. So Muhammad is receiving these verses of poetry that will become the Quran. And he's like, oh no, I've been possessed.
Correct. So Thaddeus is correct there. Which is why I really need to finish those other slides as well. Finish those notes, because as the better a storyteller or poet was, the more powerful the demon that possessed him and rode him was said to be. So you only became a very good poet or storyteller, which Muhammad apparently was or was afraid of, because then you were possessed by a demon. So understand, a lot of this history and knowledge has been stripped out so that they can save Muhammad's reputation this way. So let's continue. And he says, I am Gabriel, okay? And Gabriel in the form of a man with 2 feet astride the horizon. They repeat this, right? So at least, or maybe I'm repeating it, who knows? O Muhammad, thou art the apostle of God, and I am Gabriel. I began to turn my face away from him, but toward whatever region of the sky I looked, I saw him as before. In other words, Gabriel was so big, so massive, he covered the entire sky. So this angel was so huge, the entire sky was covered. Now let's have a look at another reference here within the Hadith, okay? So Da'if Bukhari, 3234, 3235, and Book 59, Hadiths 45 and 46. Whoever claimed that the Prophet Muhammad saw his Lord is committing a great fault, for he only saw Gabriel in his genuine shape, in which he was created, covering the whole horizon. So now you've got Gabriel, who is this massive giant of an angel, stretching from horizon to horizon. Guess which other religion, right, early pagan Gnostic religion, also happened to have Gabriel as a or an angel, a massive angel that came to a guy and gave him a holy book. This would be the 1st century, early 2nd century Altricites. So I asked Aisha, what about this statement? And she said, okay, and was at a distance. So she said, then Gabriel, approached and came close and was at a distance of 2 bow lengths. It was Gabriel who used to come to the Prophet in the figure of a man, but on that occasion he came in his actual and real figure. He was so huge that he covered the whole horizon. So Islam reinforces this idea. So let's look at the book of Al-Chisai. This is a heresy. Some of the notes here are from Gnostic revisions of Genesis stories and early Jesus traditions. Because if you're Gnostic, that's what you do. And a companion to 2nd century Christian heretics, also by Brault, both of these. The story of a book revealed or sent down from heaven by a massive angel is taken from the story of Al-Chisai from Parthia, northern Iran. Hadith writers borrowed local myths. Now, we saw earlier the Hadith writers all come from 300 years after Muhammad. Most of them lived thousands of kilometers from where Muhammad was born, a long way from where Muhammad was born. Oddly enough, generally from that area, Iran. So they borrowed their own local myths, and those made their way into the Hadiths and the Quran. The Book of Al-Chasai, also this group is called the Al-Chasaios, the Al-Kasai, the Al-Ksaios, blah, 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 or the Halkassites, is a lost prophetic text. It is a Jewish apocalypse from Babylonia, dating apparently 116 to 117, according to this scholar. We know it's an apocalyptic text, but it could date from as early as 95 up to about the year 120. Written during the reign of Emperor Trajan, 98 AD to 117, containing law and apocalyptic prophecies pertaining to messianic Christian, Jewish, pagan, and Gnostic doctrines. So now you've got this apocalyptic text which said that the apocalypse was coming anytime now, any day now. And if you look at the Quran, you look at Muhammad's early preaching, his preaching was that the apocalypse is going to happen in 20 minutes, get ready. Am I correct about that, Thaddeus?
Yeah, yeah, about 20 minutes from now, I think. So better hurry up and wrap up this presentation.
Yeah, so it is known from early Christian writings of Hippolytus of Rome, died 235, and Eusebius died 340, and Epiphanius of Salamis died 403, and Origen died 253. So it's a well-attested text from antiquity. Now, notice all of these Christian authors, they mention this book only in the context of heresies. They mention it as a heresy. So, and these ideas made their way straight into Islam. These heretical ideas went straight into Islam. The Alkassites promised remission of sins to all those who listened to the reading of this book and believed it. I believe the Muslims promised the same. Epiphanius explains the origin of the name Al-Kasai to be Aramaic, Hayal Kasai, meaning the hidden power. And of course,
Wow.
your Shias have the hidden Imam. So I don't know if there's an overlap there. Your thoughts, that is.
Yeah, the name there is very interesting. The hidden power. We can see how this led to the later Gnostics, but also how it led into Islam. The sentence you highlighted there in yellow is really important. That this is a pattern we see all the time in the writings of the early Christians, what we now call the church fathers, is that they are aware of these other texts, but they never confuse them. They always know which ones are the legitimate texts, i.e., what we now call the New Testament, and which of the texts are not legitimate, and they're not written by apostles. They're not written by people who knew Jesus. They are often but not always heretical as well. Like, it wasn't just about what they were teaching, it was also they wanted the genuine. And not only did they want that, they were unanimous in knowing which of the texts were legitimate. Compare this
Mm-hmm.
to Muhammad, who just heard a bunch of stuff, had no idea what was legitimate, and just decided based on what he liked best what to repeat.
Yeah. So now we'll start talking about the Book of Al-Chasai, and we'll go into some of that. So hopefully I've laid some groundwork, provided some historical background detail. So let's look at Origen, right? This is one of the early church fathers, and his discussion of the Book of Al-Chasai. Origen, calling them religious propagandists. Now notice the word dawa, the correct translation of the word dawa is propaganda. Dawasts are propagandists, which is interesting. These are religious propagandists. They spread dawa. Okay, don't be confused. Dawa is not preaching. Dawa is not what would be the word proselytizing. Dawa is propaganda. The correct translation of dawa is propaganda, state propaganda. Appearing in Christian churches in Palestine, reported that the Halkassites made selective use of the whole Old Testament and the Gospels. Selective use of the Old Testament and the Gospels. Origen and Hippolytus tell us that they rejected the Apostle Paul entirely. They absolutely positively hated the Apostle Paul. Do you know of another religion that hates the Apostle Paul, Thaddeus, just by sheer coincidence?
Yeah, just by sheer coincidence, Islam decided that they hate Paul. I'm sure
Yeah, I
that
wonder
they
where they
have.
got that idea. You have to wonder. The Alkassites claimed that their book had come down from heaven, according to Origen and Eusebius. Do you know of another religion that claimed their book had been literally sent down from heaven by an angel?
Hmm. Yeah. Uh, I might need some help here, but I think it's a religion called Islam. Is really obscure religion that no one's ever heard of.
Yeah, no, I can't think of one myself, to be honest. But according to Origen, the Halkassites declared that in case of emergency, outward denial of one's faith is permitted, provided that one only denies with the lips and not in one's heart. Now, is that familiar, Thaddeus?
Wow, that sounds like almost word for word what we read in the Sharia, or what we call taqiyya.
Yeah, yeah, crazy stuff, isn't it? What a sheer coincidence. So now I want to notice that I want to bring your attention to the fact that one, Islam has a vendetta against St. Paul. I have a series on this, 2 parts called Polemics, right, which discusses the historical origin of the hatred of Islam against St. Paul, which goes back to the 8th century already and goes up until the 14th, 15th century. And notice, of course, that the Muslim scholars that they take this argument from, the original scholars, all believe that Paul lived in 600 BC because he was King Saul. The same scholars also claim that that Paul was Paul of Antioch, who lived in the 200s. So Paul was from the 3rd century. So in other words, and then they also believe that that what is that? Paul is the son. Hold on, that he was the son of of Constantine. Sorry, yeah, the son of Constantine. So the Islamic scholars are a bunch of idiots who think that Paul was King Saul. He was king of the Jews, and he lived 600 years before Jesus was born. He lived 300 years after Jesus was born, and he happened to be the son of Constantine or something like that. And this is insanity. Okay, these are the scholars that Muslims are listening to, right? Allah sent down the book from heaven by a massive angel. So according to Islamic sources, the Quran came down from an angel, and according to Islamic sources, the angel was massive. His real shape was massive. In Quran 16:106, one who is forced to renounce his religion, like his heart, is secure in faith. Sorry, one who is forced to renounce his religion while his heart is secure in faith, they speak of. That's taqiyya, standard taqiyya. This they got from Al-Chasai. So I'll continue here. Dispensation is when what is normally forbidden is made permissible because of necessity. For example, if someone is forced to make a statement of unbelief, kufr, it is made permissible to ease his hardship for him to do so as long as faith remains firm in his heart. Exactly like what they taught to the Al-Chasai.
Just
Now,
a quick
yeah,
just a quick plug there. If you want to know more about the insane theories of Paul, see the 2 videos called Polemics on this channel.
yeah, it's laughable what the early scholars from the 8th century were saying about Apostle Paul. It's insanity. You've got to read it. It's incredible. And Muslims believe this stuff. I mean, obviously the embarrassing stuff they don't talk about anymore, but when you read through what the Islamic scholars that it's just I mean, you realize these people are idiots. Now the angel, so I'll do one more slide after this. Okay. Angel of Al-Chasai and the Shirkama. It had been revealed by an angel whose height was 96 miles and whose girth was 16 miles from shoulder to shoulder. He was 24 miles. His footprints were 3.5 shoni long, or 14 miles, the breadth being 4 miles. So this angel, his height was 96 miles. His girth was 16 miles. From shoulder to shoulder, he was 24 miles. His feet were 14 miles long, and his feet were 4 miles wide, like a massive angel that visited someone and gave him a book. Now, the Muslims, they dropped this little portion here. With him was a female whose dimensions, he said, accorded with those mentioned. The male, he asserts, being the Son of God, and the female was called Holy Spirit. Hippolytus, the refutation of all heresies. Your thoughts, Thaddeus, before I go on?
Very interesting. This massive angel. Someone pointed out or asked earlier, how could he fit in a cave? Um, Well, I'd just say that's what happens when you're copying a bunch of different things. You copy something about him being as big as the horizon, and you also copy something about him fitting in a cave. And as someone else pointed out, there's also stories where apparently Gabriel looked just like a human being who was visiting Muhammad, and everyone's like, "Why was that guy with you?" And he's like, "Oh, no, 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 no. That wasn't that guy that you thought you saw. That was Gabriel. They look exactly the same."
Yeah. So this is plagiarized directly from this is plagiarized. So the Quran plagiarized, or Islam plagiarizes this. So now let's go to the Shirk Ma. Okay, this is actually, now originally this was plagiarized from Jewish literature again. So the Shirk Ma are the dimensions or the measurement of the body, right? That's how that translates. The dimensions or measurement of the body. It's a midrashic text that is part of the Hekalat literature. It purports to record in anthropomorphic terms the secret names and the precise measurements of God's corporeal limbs and parts. So now you've got an idea of the secret names of God, the secrets, right? And the precise measurements of God's corporeal limbs and parts. And of course, the El Chasai decided they knew the exact measurements. And the majority of the text is recorded in the form of sayings or teachings that the angel Metatron, Megatron, anyone seen that movie? Megatron revealed, sorry, the transformer Megatron revealed to the Tanaic sage Rabbi Yishmael, who transmitted it to his students and his contemporary Rabbi Akiva. And the Tanaitic period was from the year 10 to 220 AD, which encompasses the very same period as the Book of Al-Chasai. So,
Excellent.
your thoughts on that, Thaddeus? Anything before and my final slide is coming up?
Yeah, I'm sure that it's, just pure coincidence here that the time period overlaps, the description overlaps, the theological ideas overlap, just pure coincidence. Muhammad was just getting all this information from Gabriel, from Allah. He did not have any knowledge of these other things, which just happened to have the same information, I'm sure.
It's all just real coincidence. So hopefully you can start to see parallels here. These ideas are not new, and hopefully you're starting to see connections between things I introduced early on and the things we're seeing now. As I go further, you'll start to see more and more of these connections. They'll become more and more clear, right? Now, the book of Al-Chasai, we've got to look at a guy called Alcibiades, right? There's more than one Alcibiades in history, but we're talking about a particular Alcibiades relevant to this topic. The conclusion is that the Alkacites had a Jewish Christian background based in Syria. It is also an exegetical analysis of Song of Songs 5:11 to 16 as the love between God and Israel, and proclaims that anyone who studies it is guaranteed a portion in Olam Haba, the world to come.
Okay.
Yeah, go on, please.
No, I was just sorry, I didn't mean to, I didn't mean to say that
Go
out
on.
loud. I just thought that was very interesting. Is all.
Okay, how so? Now tell me more.
I, that they're going to Song of Solomon, this this erotic love poem, and they're drawing their theology based on that. Now, in this case, this is
Don't the
actually a
Muslims do that as well and
coincidence.
tell us that Momomo is in the Bible? He's in Song of Songs?
Yeah. In this case, it's actually a coincidence because this is a modern Muslim argument. But they go to the Song of Solomon and they say that Muhammad is found there, and this is just very interesting. In this case, that argument isn't directly borrowed from it, but we see the same pattern,
But the
right?
fact that they
That
glom onto the very same passage is interesting.
right. Yeah, definitely. We see the same pattern that they're desperately going to the Bible to try to validate their religion, which only makes sense if the Bible has authority. But if the Bible has authority, then their religion is false. Very interesting.
Yeah. So he alleges as to those who actually it's true. Why do they want the Bible to give their religion authority while at the same time they say the Bible is corrupted and unusable? But they need the Bible to prove their religion. But if the Bible is authoritative, then why do we need their religion to be proven from the Bible? It's like, why are you going to another authority if you are yourself authoritative? Like, no, it doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
He
Exactly.
alleges, so written in the book from Hippolytus, he alleges as to those who have been involved in every description of lasciviousness and filthiness and in acts of wickedness, if only any of them be a believer, that he determines that such a one, on being converted and obeying the book and believing its contents, should by baptism receive remission of sins. So these guys were selling salvation. Um, so yeah, I think I will end there today. This is
Excellent.
good for now. So basically, so this is hopefully, so what have we established that is, and what have you taken away from this, and what has the audience taken away? I'll open it up to the audience.
Yeah. I'll start by saying anyone who wants to come up and dispute what we have to say, only on this topic, leave a message in chat and I'll drop the link. If you want to dispute on something else, you like this idiot who was claiming Muhammad's in the Bible, or this idiot with his fruit and seeds nonsense. If you want to talk about anything else, also let me know in the comments and I'll start a new stream after we're done with this one. But I want to keep this stream about this topic, which is the Gnostic origins of Islam. You think that what we said is false? by all means, let me know in the chat and I will give you the link to come up and talk with us. In the meantime, to give people a chance to do that, I'll share my thoughts on today's presentation. I think that this is really super interesting. I think that although this isn't technically new information, and as you pointed out, scholars have been looking at this stuff for hundreds of years, I think it is new information for most of us, and that most of us have no idea about all of these connections. We do know that the Quran, those of us who study Islam know that the Quran borrows from other texts, borrows ideas from here and there. But I think we don't have appreciation of just how deeply ingrained this is. It's not just taking some texts and copying some ideas, but it goes to the very heart of what the religion is, that everything about it is based on this secret knowledge. It explains the behavior of Muslims we see today. It explains why when we talk to the average Muslim, they often really don't know anything about the religion. They have no clue what they are talking about. And it's all because even though the average Muslim doesn't know it, Islam is a system of secret knowledge where only the elite of the elite, even many of the imams and sheikhs, don't know everything there is to know about it. Only the very most elite know everything.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, you know what? Maybe I wonder if I should do another different slide. Yeah, there's so much that I can bring up, but so much now. So what I'm as I said, I'm introducing various pieces, but now I'm trying to go to the earliest source where they started to do this kind of thing that Islam does. Sorry, Mani was an ultrasite for 20 years, and then so you go from basically Simon Magus, who was the first of these sort of heretical people who wanted to adopt Christianity for his own purpose, and then you get these ultrasites, and then it goes on to Mani, and it goes on and goes on, and you get to Islam. But hopefully, you can start to see the connections that are forming, and that this is not a new idea. None of this is new, and that scholars have known about this for at least 200 years. There's lots of material out there, and once you start to if I go through the history of every single story in the Quran, you'll start to see that all of it's plagiarized, because none of it is Orthodox Christianity. All of it is heretical and Gnostic and legendary stories. So, any questions from the audience? Any comments from the audience?
Yeah, I have a number of comments that I saved from throughout. Emmanuel asked, "Is this under Research Gate?"
The
I'm
one
not. Sorry. He asked that when you had the archaeology article up, but I think I'm not sure if he was actually saying
that particular article was available at ResearchGate.
Excellent. All right. So that answers the question. I wasn't sure if he was asking, if the presentation was available, or he was asking about that specific article. Let's see. Marion pointed out that she's actually heard Abdul's claim that Paul is the son of Constantine. So apparently this isn't actually a dead argument that we only find in Islam's history books. Apparently, at least some Muslims are hearing this today, that are hearing this from their leaders and teachers, telling them that Paul of the Bible is also the son of Constantine. Now, Constantine did
No
have a
way.
son with a similar name, but they're not the same person by any means.
Wow, these are idiots. Oh my gosh. Peter 2 Apologetic says, why did Muhammad make no miracles? I'm sorry to disappoint you, Peter 2, but Muhammad was the most prolific producer of miracles in history, more so than any prophet in the Bible, bar none. Muhammad is the number one producer of miracles. Here we've got a list of 300 authenticated miracles of Muhammad. Okay, written by, this is obviously a Jewish guy, Badr Azimabadi. And okay, so let me see here. Miracles like the signs of Allah. Okay, maybe it's not a Jew. It looks like a Muslim because he's talking about Allah here. Sorry, I would hate to think it was propaganda, But notice, I just want to show you the basic sources of this book are the Quran and Hadith, and then the original historical books. Some of them are the Al-Siha Al-Sitta, the 6 authentic books of Hadith, and this whole long list of nonsense over here. Okay, and they mention here a ton of stuff about the great miracles of good old Momo. Okay, And so you need to understand that they speak here of copious miracles by good old Mo. There's a whole long list. The Holy Quran is a miracle. So that Muhammad received it is a major miracle. And they speak of, you got to read this. This is a complete joke. Okay, when you actually read it, it's a complete and total joke. But yeah, it's just supposedly he was a major miracle worker. And then of course Bukhari also worked miracles. Just so you know. That is, yeah.
Yeah, said something similar that the further you go in Islamic history, the more and more miracles it seems that Muhammad worked. You look at the Quran, it says over and over again he can't work any miracles. You look at the Sahih Hadith, he works a few miracles. You look at the Sirah, he does nothing but work miracles, as near as I can tell. That every day he's like doing some sort of miracle, and most of them seem to be copied from Jesus. They seem to be things that Jesus
Yeah,
actually did, just attributed to Muhammad for some
yeah.
reason.
Like water coming out between his hands, splitting rocks, taking a huge rock, hitting it once with a hammer, and it becomes sand and stupid things. So yeah, this Takinardi guy just honestly has nothing to contribute and just goes off topic. I mean, this is all they have now. None of them
Yeah,
have.
I've
Yeah,
asked him 3 or 4 times, does he want to discuss his Muhammad in the Bible theories with me after this? And he never answers my question. He just repeats his copy and paste line. And very interesting. I
yeah,
guess he doesn't want to discuss with me, probably because he knows he has no knowledge and he can't, his views can't stand up to scrutiny.
yeah. It's just, I mean, yeah, it's just. Hold on, you know what
Do
I'm gonna. Yeah,
oh, sorry. I was going to say I do have a couple legitimate questions
sure. What are they,
as well, but
please?
well, first, this isn't a question, but I wanted to read it. He never turned as a horse. I've heard much of this in bits and pieces, but no one pulls it together with clarity like Lloyd.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for that.
Very much appreciated.
Um,
Thank you. Yeah.
so, Protestant believer says Quran claims to be explained in details. Why do you need Ibn Kathir that comes centuries later? Very good question, Lloyd. I think that there's a meta issue here. Why do Muslims need to have scholars explaining what the Quran really means to them?
Yeah, we saw earlier, if I go back here to creating the Quran, remember they speak of the Quranic text was a corpus of traditions that remained open even after Muhammad's death, right? Whoever he was, continuing to absorb Jewish and Christian traditions in the decades after the believers conquered and occupied the Near East. So understand that if you go back to Arabia, they only had portions of the gospel. One or two chapters, like Matthew and Luke, apparently had been translated. So they had those, right? But they didn't have the whole Bible. So they only got it in drips and drabs and pieces. So as they discovered new material, they had to improvise and provide something equivalent. They had to provide an equivalent narrative. They had to develop their own propaganda. So they got it. And don't forget, the Bible was, they finally only got the full Bible, I think, in Islam when they invaded Spain. They got a full Bible. So it wasn't until they invaded Spain in what, the late 7th century, that they finally got their hands on the Bible, and they didn't probably read it. If you look at my polemic series, they didn't actually bother to read the Bible until about the late 8th century. When they read it, they went, oops, because Muhammad in the Quran had said that this is what the Bible says. And they were fully confident of that. And there was no questioning the dogma. When a scholar actually sat down to read it, they were like, oops, we made a mistake. Then they had to suddenly develop a lot of polemics and a lot of additional material. So hence a lot of late material comes in, and they realize they had to fill in the blanks. And so what if you read further through this, they talk about in this document, in this book, with the research, that the Quran is not material that is logically connected. They were grabbing crap from all over the place and trying to stick it together. And to do that, they had to write a bunch of stuff to try and make, it's a kludge. They had to make a whole bunch of unrelated nonsense fit together, and hence it's this patchwork. So therefore they needed all of this additional material, which took 200 years to write. So that's why there's no material for suddenly for 200 years, poof, everything disappears, and then 200 years later, bang, there you go. There's all these hadiths suddenly. So hopefully that gives you some idea. Thaddeus, does that sound viable?
Yeah, and the only other thing I would point out is that the doctrine of abrogation means that no one really knows what anything means unless they know absolutely everything, because you don't
Unless you
know
know the
what's
Sharia. The
abrogated.
Sharia tells you what's viable still.
You're right, but that only the scholars know that, right?
Yeah,
So
correct.
this is why you need a scholar to tell you, because you, as a common Muslim, you don't know what's abrogated. You don't know, and if it is abrogated, you don't know how it's abrogated. You don't know if the words are abrogated, the meaning's abrogated,
True.
the you don't know if the hadith's correct or the Quran's correct, because they each both can abrogate each other. It's just a giant mess.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, they needed to rescue this, and this was a whole propaganda effort. Don't forget the whole story took about 800 to 900 years to put together. Only finished in about the 15th century.
And then I had one other question
Oh,
from
Jesus is a
Nicholas.
Muslim. Is this Safraz? You
No,
pagan
this is a
demon.
different guy. Saffras did have a name along those lines, but this is a different guy. He's been using that name for years on YouTube. So
Sweetheart, child, well, whatever you prefer to be called. Um, I know you're annoyed that I have made these videos for Al Fadi on Syria International. Do you think you can stop going off topic and actually show me, look, if I've lied about the Sharia, go to the Sharia manual, present the evidence and say, Lloyd misquoted page 5 that actually says the following, or no, Lloyd used the wrong chapter. He should actually have gone to page 6 where it says the following, because it actually says all these nice things that Lloyd missed. If you can just bring evidence, you would very readily, very easily prove me to be a liar. It would be so easy. Bring the evidence to show where I was wrong, prove me to be a liar from your own sources, that I misquoted, misrepresented your sources, and you would win. That's all you have to do. You don't have to tell us that Jesus was born on a Thursday at 4 p.m., not on a Wednesday at 2 p.m., and was born to a woman called Jean and to a guy called Frank. And all of these, we don't need to know that. Am I right or am I wrong about the fiqh? Yes or no? Because somehow you guys never provide evidence that prove me wrong. So I'm assuming you say I am 100% correct. Sorry. Next topic.
yeah. So Nicholas asked. He asked it earlier, and I think I don't. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I saved it the first time. But he wants at a later date, not right now. But he wants you to make a video specifically just on the original name of Allah and how his name was how he's a transformation of or amalgamation of the gods of Arabia.
That is
Um,
in my monotheism series. That thesis was finally presented, I think, in the 1950s by a major American archaeologist who said that eventually they simply just amalgamated all of these gods into one and called it Allah. Allah was not a name, was not the name of a god. Allah generally is a descriptor. It's like saying Caesar, but which Caesar? There were 12 Caesars. Now, of course, when we say Caesar today, we kind of generally think Julius, right? Julius Caesar. But there were 12 Caesars. So which one did we refer to specifically? Now, the Allah of the Kaaba, when Mo was born, he was consecrated to the Allah called Hubal. So this is covered in my monotheism series, which is fairly lengthy, but it's in my monotheism series that I talk about that, and that's a paper that was written like 70 years ago already.
Yeah, I think he wants, just one compact video just on that subject. Obviously,
Okay,
it's just a request. You don't have to do it, but he just wants a video on that for easy reference, was the request.
okay. Any other questions or?
Uh, just a couple quick comments, and then we'll close out, unless one of the Muslims in the chat wants to say, I would like to have a chat with you, Thaddeus, and then I'll start another stream for them. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again soon. So to my moderators, don't time anyone out. We're about to wrap up anyway. So if the Muslims want to have a conversation, they need to tell me in those words that they want to have a conversation, and I'll start a stream for them. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up here in a couple minutes. Farish says Burroughs is a mixer machine. And I think mixer machine's a better description than Burroughs, because it's a mixing, right? It's not a straight copy and paste. We call it copy and paste just because people know what that means, but it's not really a straight copy and paste. It's, take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, mix the ideas together and hope that it makes sense. And usually it actually doesn't.
Yeah. So once again, what did you take away today, Thaddeus? I mean, what was important here for you?
Well, one other comment I want to read real quick, and then I'll close out on that. Very informative, Mufti Lloyd. Thank you, Thaddeus. And from Solo Cristo, they use a so-called corrupted source to prove their lies. How stupid can you get? And the answer is that's Islam. Islam,
Yeah.
nothing makes any sense. You claim that the scriptures are corrupted, or the Christian scriptures are corrupted, and then you try to prove Islam by quoting the Christian scriptures. Uh, or, in many cases, if they're talking to a Hindu, they'll quote the Hindu scriptures. Or if they're talking to a Buddhist, they'll quote Buddhist scriptures. They don't seem to understand that by quoting the scriptures, you give them authority. You can't get any validity for Islam from something else unless that something else has authority on its own right. Now, to answer your question, what did we learn today? I think we learned a couple things. One, we learned that the Muslims in the chat, and there was half dozen or so that spoke up. Who knows how many were watching in total? They don't have any answers for this material. Not one even attempted to address the material. They only attempted to distract with other things. This is a message for the Christians here. Muslims do not know how to deal with this material. They have no answers because they've never heard it before. So take this material, use it in your conversations with Muslims. Ask them why their book has elements from all of these Gnostic texts, why they have elements from these, not just words, not just stories, but theology that is borrowed from these sources. Because they won't be able to say, like they can say with the Bible, well, there's some truth in it because it's corrupted, but there's still some truth there. They cannot say that, at least not honestly, because their book doesn't tell them anything about all these things they're borrowing from. So that's takeaway number one. Takeaway number two is that we, as critics of Islam, have been doing ourselves a disservice. We haven't been diving deep. We've seen these surface level connections, and we like Jesus speaking from the cradle. We know that comes from the infancy gospel of Thomas, and we say, look, the Islam is borrowing from the infancy gospel of Thomas. Well, that's true, but that's only barely scratching the surface. We're missing out on the true polemical value here. We're missing out on how deeply and intimately connected Islam is to these Gnostic ideas. It's not that they just borrowed some stories, it's that they are Gnostic. And the scholars of Islam know this. They openly state this in their texts that are only supposed to be read by other scholars. The average Muslim, the kind that are in the chat, they have no idea. They don't know these things, but their scholars know. Anything you'd like to add, Lloyd?
I'm just amazed that they actually say that Paul is the son of Constantine. You're like, are you people insane? That's like the 4th century. Like, what is wrong with you? I mean, like, you believe these guys who are so historically inept? Wow, the level of stupidity. I mean, the wow, it's just mind-boggling.
Indeed. I don't
Yeah,
see
Tone
any.
asked a very good question. If Jesus is the morning star, if the morning star is a pagan title, why is Jesus Christ called the morning star in Revelation? Which is a fair question. I mean, these titles have all been borrowed and have been used a lot. But when you look at the context of different pagan religions, you look at the context of different ideologies, they mean different things under those guises. Because don't forget, the Gnostics were plagiarizing Judaism way back then, right? The early Gnostics go back to the Egyptian mystery schools, and that goes back to about 1200 BC. So now you're looking about 500 years after what we know is the earliest records of Judaism. So they've been taking these and they've been applying these names to their gods. So which came first, right? Which came second, right? So we know that a lot of these things were found historically and were taken. And then, of course, within the Bible, you've got that where God actually says, I cover this in monotheism, where God says, look, that name that they give that God, that name is mine. It is only given to me. They are using that name in vain. And you need to make sure that those gods are destroyed so that I reclaim my name. God reclaims his name. So there's those issues that arise as well. So it doesn't mean that the pagans came first. The pagans, not necessarily. hopefully that gives an answer. Thaddeus, your thoughts?
It looks like Ultimate Truth. He wants to discuss something with me. He didn't specify what. So it looks like we'll have another stream after this. Um, I'll take like a 3-5 minute break, get something to
Okay.
drink, use the bathroom, but I'll see you all back here shortly. I also will have a chat later this week. I don't remember if it's Wednesday. I think it might be Wednesday. It might be Tuesday, whatever. I have a chat sometime this week, so be on the lookout for that with the Black Doctor. He joined a chat a little while ago, and I was very impressed with his knowledge, so I invited him on. He's going to be talking about the original followers of Jesus. Were they Muslims, as we're told, or did they teach the exact same things as Christians today teach? So it should be a very interesting talk.
Yeah.
He has a lot of knowledge about early church history, a lot of expertise in that subject matter. So I'm very anxious to, I mean, I know the answer, and the answer is obvious, but I'm very interested in hearing the depth of this and diving deeply into that topic.
Taki Nadi says, like, apparently it's a major thing that, the earliest followers of Jesus didn't call themselves Christians. Did you know that? Well, you know what? Muslims wasn't applied to Muslims until 200 years after Mo died. That name didn't even stick around. In fact, it was much later that it became an accepted name. Prior to that, there are a bunch of other names. So what's your point? What's your point?
Yeah, well, thank you for that advertisement for the stream I was just referring to. Tune into that stream, and we'll see whether the first followers of Jesus were Christians or whether they were Muslims. I don't think they called themselves Muslims either. In fact, they called themselves followers of the way.
They
were
call
Jews.
themselves Hagarenes, they call themselves Saracens, they call themselves the believers for the longest time before they even started to use the term Muslims, like 200 years after Mo died. Like, that name came very late.
Yeah, sorry, I
So,
was referring to the first Christians. They called themselves followers
yeah,
of
but
the
I mean,
way.
it's like, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If Christianity is false because the followers didn't call themselves Christians in 10 minutes, well, it's the same for Islam. So Islam's false on that basis too. Thanks, buddy. So that's me.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all for joining us today. If you have not subscribed to Lloyd's channel, please do so now. I know that there are a lot of people who may have tuned in for the first time based on the numbers we had today. So if you enjoyed what you see today, go over to Lloyd's channel. There's a link in the video description and subscribe, because this is the type of in-depth material that he produces all the time. The guy is a fantastic researcher. And I'm not just saying that because he's here. I would say that whether he was here or not. He finds things that others miss for sure. So I'm going to take a couple-minute break to use the bathroom, and then I'll be back. We'll see if Ultimate Truth wants to join me. We'll see what nonsense he wants to talk about today.
Yeah. So
Have a great
perhaps
week.
we can pick this up again next week then.
Yeah, definitely. This is only part one of, looks like, at least 4 parts. So
Well,
definitely.
we went pretty fast. If we can keep this pace up, we can cut it
down. Yes. So look for part 2 probably next weekend. We don't have a specific date in mind yet, but we're definitely going to continue this series. The feedback from the audience has been fantastic. I'm glad that people found this entertaining, but also take this material, absorb it, use it in your conversations, because Muslims are not ready to talk about this material. They want to talk about the usual stuff, and don't let them change the subject, because this utterly disproves Islam. If Islam is borrowing things from pre-Islamic religions, that means Muhammad is not receiving revelation and Islam is false. Thank you for joining us. God bless. Have a great week.
Correct. God bless. Good and happy New Year, guys. Thank you.